So the purpose of this video is to walk you through some basic usage of the fruit chamber accessory kit with the 900. So all you need to use this fruit chamber is the actual chamber itself with your lid, your fruit commodity inside. In my case, my example is a grapefruit. You're going to need this wand that connects from your fruit chamber to the 900, and then obviously you'll need your 900. So the initial connection, you just connect the wand here to your fruit chamber. And then there's this little screw here that you actually tighten to make sure you have a secure connection between the wand and your fruit chamber. So now to summarize what we have done. We have gas being pulled from our fruit chamber, going into the instrument. It's then traveling through our water trap to pull out any interfering gases other than ethylene. And then it's being analyzed by our sensor. Gas is being vented out of the 900 here, and because this isn't connected, ambient air is being returned to our fruit chamber. So the other option is to connect the other part of your wand to the outtake of the instrument. So now what's happening is I'm not returning ambient air to my fruit chamber, I'm just cycling this gas. I've created a closed loop in effect. So another option at this point is if I go back to my settings screen, I can now choose to turn my chamber out on. So that is now utilizing the potassium permanganate in the back of the chamber to scrub the ethylene from the gas that's being returned to my fruit chamber. So just to go through that again, in this situation, I'm pulling gas from my fruit chamber. It's being brought into the 900. It's passing through my water trap in the back, which is pulling out my interfering gases. It's being analyzed by the sensors. And then it is passing through my solids chamber, or my potassium permanganate, being scrubbed of ethylene gas before it's returned to my chamber. So this is a good precaution to take if you have high levels of ethylene accumulating in your chamber. If you don't scrub the returning gas, then those levels are going to continue to build and build and build. And what you can do is actually inhibit the respiration of your fruit. In this specific example, I have potassium permanganate in the solids chamber. The other option is to put soda lime in there, and that would actually scrub your system of CO2 before it was returned back to your chamber. So just to summarize that, in my settings at this point, I have both my chamber out and my chamber in on. You can see that in this case, so far I haven't seen a big difference in my measurement. I can see clearly where I turned the chamber in on, or when I started using polar sept. And I can see another kind of little bit of a drop when I started turning my chamber out, or using my potassium permanganate before it returned to the system. So again, there's a little bit of a drop, and that would be expected. All of these decisions, whether you hook this up to the outport or not, and whether you utilize the chambers in the back, are up to your experimental setup. So after the sensor stabilizes, it's going to automatically switch into your graph mode, where it will show you the changing concentration of ethylene in your fruit chamber. So you can see that it leveled out at first around 2.5 ppm, but now is increasing the longer that the fruit sits in my chamber. So again, right now, the way I have it set up, it's pulling gas from this fruit chamber. It's traveling the length of the wand, going into my analyzer. I'm not modifying the gas that's returning to the chamber in any way. Since this is disconnected, that just means I'm pulling ambient air, and that's what's being returned back to my chamber. So from here, what you can do is you can navigate past monitor mode, where it just shows you your ethylene concentration, CO2 and O2 in digital form. You can navigate to the settings screen. And here's where you can start to make some decisions about your experimental setup, specifically in regards to the 2 chambers on the back of the unit. So you have your chamber in that you could put water in to be for polar sept. And again, what polar sept does is that's going to try and trap alternate hydrocarbons other than ethylene, so that the value you get on the display should be truer to the actual ethylene concentration than just total VOCs. Your chamber out is going to have, you can put different solids in there. So just to show you, currently right now in my chamber out, or my solid chamber, I have potassium permanganate in there, and we use that to scrub ethylene from the gas. I also have water in my chamber in, or in my water chamber, but if we go back to the setting screen, you can see that I currently have both of those chambers turned to off. So if I want to utilize one of those chambers, I need to turn it on. But right now, the path of the gas stream is going into the instrument, and since both of those are turned off, and since this isn't connected, I'm not modifying the gas being returned to the chamber in any way. And if I just went here and turned one of these on, I still wouldn't be modifying, for example, the chamber out with my solids. If I turn that on right now, that still wouldn't be doing anything because the flow path of the gas is to that chamber last. I could, at this, the way I have it set up currently, what I could do is I could turn my chamber in, or my water chamber, to on. Now what I've just done is now the gas is pulled from my fruit chamber into the instrument, and before it is analyzed, it's passing through my water trap to limit the number of hydrocarbons that are being analyzed, and to try and bring that to simply solely be ethylene. So if I go back at this point, I could give this a few minutes to see how using polar sept would influence my measurement. You're going to have one of these will represent your intake, meaning that it's pulling gas from this chamber and inputting it into the 900 to be analyzed. And the other one is going to be your outtake. So that's simply after the gas is analyzed here, or it could also be just drawing ambient air if you don't connect to the 900, and I'll talk about that more in a minute. So initial connection, this is going to be just your power supply, and what this does is it powers the fans inside the fruit chamber. So when you plug that in, you should hear the fans here start to run. The purpose of these fans is to circulate the gas inside the chamber and compensate for any stratification of gases that may occur. For example, CO2 is a heavier gas, so it tends to sink to the bottom. So these fans help compensate for that effect. So then, once again, I have my two options here for connection. So one of these needs to go into the intake of the 900. So in this case, if I were to start measuring right now, what would happen is I would draw gas from inside this fruit chamber. It would travel the length of the wand, go into the instrument, be analyzed by the sensors inside the instrument, and then that gas would be vented to the ambient air. This, if I don't connect it, still returns gas to my chamber, but since it's not connected to anything, it's returning ambient air conditions. So let's go ahead and leave this set up for a minute, and I'll start to measure, and then we can talk about other options for setup of your fruit chamber. So I'm going to hit measure, and I'm going to give it a little while to stabilize.